Okay, this is Shir number 11, and I'm going to try to wrap up with this Shir the ideas of current events and so on, in terms of what I think is happening and why, and to a certain extent what will happen, sort of like predictions and so on. But like I say, one really never knows. This isn't the Nevuah prophecy. It's merely Chokhmah trying to figure out, based on a divine agenda, what is happening. Based on also what we know, what has to happen eventually. The real question is when and who are the actors. But we do have a good understanding of the plot, and so on, And this share is really what's called the bottom line share. That's the bottom line share. This is all the 10 shurim I gave until now really comes to this point. What's this all about? Why do I think Trump is going to win? Hope he does, and that he's going to win. And so, what is this really all about? So that's what I want to talk about. So the first thing I'm going to do is read you a Yalkut, which there are several of them which I want to read or tell you about, because they're critical to understand what is about to happen in terms of the hashkafa. So here goes. This Yalkut is Yalkut Shemoni. It's Yeshayahu, and it's the siman, or the section is Tov Sadik Tes, which is 499, and it's a long piece. But there's certain very critical pieces that you have to know, and then I'm going to talk about it in the shir, about these pieces, about the Mashiach, what he has to do, what has to happen before he comes. So it's really very, very important. Okay. Vayar Elokim Esa'o Kitov, and God saw the light, that it was good. This obviously is embracious. Melamed, this teaches us that God anticipates, looks forward to the generation of the Mashiach. God looks forward, he anticipates the generation of the Mashiach and in his actions, which you have to understand, mitzapeh means to look forward to with a great sense of excitement. For those people who think that, well, God doesn't seem to be interested anymore, God is anticipating with what's called in English bated breath the arrival of Mashiach, and believe me, we can understand when we take a look at what's happening today with all the evil dictatorships and even unfortunately what's happening in America and so on. And he looked forward to this koydem shenivra olam, before the world was created. Already his mind is on, I can't wait till this ends. That's the mindset of which is stated here. Okay, and he concealed the Mashiach and that generation under his divine throne, tachas kisei hakavod, and he concealed his or, the messianic light, which is the Or Rishon, or the Or Hagonos, the first light, which was 6 days of creation, the Or Hagonos, the concealed light, or the Or Mashiach, they're all the same thing. He concealed all of that under his great throne. Now, here goes. Oma Satan lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Satan, who was also created at that time, he says to God, Ribono Shel Olam, the light that you just concealed under your throne, Lemi, who's this for? So Amalei, so God says to him, Lemishu osed, for that individual who in the future will destroy you and incredibly embarrass you. That's who I'm giving it to. So the Satan says to God, Harehuli, show it to me. I want to see this stuff. Amalei, so God says to him, Boy, it's okay, come and take a look. So God showed him that light, or that incredible. And it says, and when the Satan saw it, Nizda'azeya, he trembled, the Satan, and the Satan is no slouch. He trembled, v'nofel alponov, and he collapsed. He fell on his face, and he said, Bevadai, definitely, this is obviously going to be given to the Mashiach, which will destroy me and all the princes of Avodah Zarah that defy God. That's the first aspect of the Medrash. So we begin to see from here the power of this Or, what it's going to do, that even the Satan went bananas on this. And he realized it's a game changer. It's It's over. Then Medrash continues, B'oisei Shor at that time, at the same time before the world was created, Yisrakshu Umus Oilam, the nations of the world, the Sorum of those nations, the angel that's in charge. So Amru Lefonov, so they said to God, Miuzeh, who is this guy? She'onu Noiflim Biyodei, that we will fall for him. Mashemoy Matuvoi, what's his name? Interesting. And what's his character? What's his nature? So God said, Omar Kodesh Baruch Hu, Ephraim Mashiach Tzidki Shemoi, Mashiach ben Yosef. The Medrash calls him Mashiach ben Ephraim because he comes from Ephraim, which is the descendant of Yosef. Umagbia koimasoi, he will lift his stature, koimas doiroi, and the stature of his generation. Umeya eine Yisrael, and he will enlighten the eyes of Israel. Umoishia amoi, and he will cause salvation to his people. And no nation or language will be able to stand up to him. All his enemies, they will tremble and flee from this individual. Imagine what that light must be if everybody is trembling and running. Now, but how does it all come about? There's a third piece. So God started to talk to Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben Ephraim, when they all ran away, Satan and the nations of the world. So God says to the Mashiach, and you have to hear this incredible dialogue. God says to Mashiach, by the way, this is all before the world was created. So God says to him, those people that you are somehow protecting, so God says, their sins, their sins, asidim leachnischo be'ol barzel. Their sins in the future are going to make you suffer under an enormous weight. And the Medrash refers to it as a beams of iron, a yoke, put on oxen, it's pretty heavy. A yoke of solid iron, beams of iron. And they will make you like a calf. You know, you put a yoke on an ox, and they will disturb greatly your spirit, be oil with this yoke. And because of the sins of these people, you mean the Jews, your mouth will be stuck, your tongue will be stuck to your mouth. God says to them, do you want this? In other words, you want to accept the sins of the Jewish people? You really want this? In other words, he's asking the Mashiach, do you want these sins? You have to understand what that means. What it means is this. You know, everybody sins. What happens is they have a kapora in the generation. Fine. I mean, while they live, they have all kinds of trials and tribulations and so on. Fine. And then if it's not enough, then they come back begilgal. They come back as a reincarnation, and they got to continue whatever they didn't complete, because the object is to remove all their sins so they can get Olam Haba, or rather Gan Eden, or Olam Haba, and so on. The problem is that many people, fortunately, there are many Jews, it's not sufficient to live out or to have an atonement for their sins in one lifetime, and not even in many lifetimes. It's not sufficient. And apparently even Gehenna cannot erase it. So therefore what God needs is somebody to take on those sins on himself and suffer for the sake of Klal Yisrael, which a Jew can do for another, because every Jew is really one neshama. Well, you know, without knowing how it works, but a Jew can take on the sins of others to allow them to survive. In Kabbalah, what?
Isn't this a Christian concept?
You mean the Christians borrowed it from the Jews?
Okay.
Let's locate it. Yeah, of course, that's the classic Christian. But where do you think they got it from? This is Medrash was Yechezkel Novi suffered for the Jews. In Kabbalah or Hashkafa, it's called Soivlei Chayloim. So God says to Mashiach ben Yosef ben Ephraim, you want this? Means, do you want to be the Soivlei Chayloim? You want to take on that responsibility where you will suffer for all those Jews that can't make it? That's essentially what he's asking him. Who are some of the big Soivlei Chayloim? I'll tell you, Moshe Rabbeinu is one, and that's why he's buried outside Eretz Yisrael, because his neshama is therefore surrounded by what's called a barrier that does not allow him to access the ore, and that suffering of Moshe Rabbeinu atones for the Jews. That's why he's buried outside Eretz Yisrael, and that's the symbol that he's what's called in the Klippa, that he's one of the Soivlei Chayloim. the Mashiach, as you will see, Mashiach, and many tzaddikim of many generations also. In fact, the name of this kind of suffering is called Yisurin Shel Ava, sufferings of love, because if you have to K'rerecha Kamoicha, you love your neighbor, therefore you will accept suffering for him to get atoned. Okay, and you see that. You see my Gemaras talk about that. You find that, for instance, Gemara Rabbi Eliezer, I think it's Rabbi Elazar or Rabbi Eliezer in Gemara and Brachas, where he had tremendous suffering. So Rabbi Yochanan came to him, and there was a discussion, and ultimately said to him, well, do you want me to lift the Yisurim from you or not? Tell me. Obviously Rabbi Yochanan could do that. So I think it was Rabbi Eliezer or Elazar, and he said, it was Naf Hey, I think, on the base, where he says to him, I don't want them or their schar. That's a strange lashon for Yisurim, which means that he was really suffering not for his own sins, he was suffering for the sins of Klal Yisrael, right? Which apparently at one time maybe is accepted. He says, I don't want them, and the din is that if you don't want those sufferings for somebody else, they're immediately removed, and therefore they were removed. But that's called Yisurin Shel Hava, which is sufferings that a person can accept for the sake of others. So God says to the Mashiach, do you want this? So Omar Mashiach Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have to listen to what the Mashiach said. He said, Rabbeinu Shel Olam, is this suffering could be a long time, a lot of years? Wants to know how long is this going to go, So God says, Chayecha, based on your life and the life of your head, whatever, Shavua Zalti Olecha. It's only for a week. It's a long week. It's probably God's week. And he says, Im nafshecha atzeva, and if you feel depressed about this, Ani Todim Yachshav, I'll take them away. I'll remove them. If you don't want them, fine. Because remember, you have to accept this. So Omar Lefonov, so the Mashiach says in front of the Rebbeinu Shalom, he says, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the universe, Begilas Libi, with joy in my heart, Ubesimchas Libi, and tremendous happiness in my heart. Take a look at this. I accept on me all the suffering, that on the condition that not one Jewish soul should be lost. Not one Jewish neshama should be lost. It means if there are people that nothing will, it means they just have too many sins, and either a lifetime or a Gilgal, or maybe even Gehenna is not going to do it, I'm the guy. I'm the fall guy. That's what he says. And then he says to Mashiach, V'lo yichayim b'levad, and not only those living when I will be around in my time, it means on the earth, right? But even those that are dead, they die in my time. I will accept suffering for them also, that they can make it. And not only those that die in my time, but those that have died since Adam HaRishon. Means every Jew that ever lived, or every Mesakin, that's really, because when the Adam HaRishon is not Jewish, but it means anybody who had a chance to do tikkun, to rectify creation, and they sinned, right? And it's not sufficient, right? And they need someone to substitute to take it over. I accept all of it, that every Jew will survive. It's astounding.
It goes beyond Jews.
What?
It goes beyond Jews.
No, I shall explain that. It means every Mesakin, because between Adam and Avram, everybody could rectify creation. I mentioned that, right? So therefore, even them, right? Now, and then he says, and not only these guys, even those miscarriages. A woman was carrying, and she miscarried. So these kids were never born, right? I accept punishment. I accept Yisur and suffering for them. You lay it all on me. Whoever needs my help, I'm the fall guy. Which is beyond belief. I mean, we're talking about how many millions of Jews or whatever. B'kachani roitze, Mashiach says, this is what I want. Okay? And b'kachani makabel. And I accept this. So it says that in the Shavua Sheben David Bo, now we begin to understand that this Mashiach will be alive in the time of Ben David, means at that time, right? So what they do, they brought Kiris Shel Basel. They brought beams of iron, and they put it on his neck. I mean, this is symbolic. And the oil was the sins of all those Jews, right? Imagine they put this on the neck of the person, of the Mashiach, right? I mean, could you imagine, all of a sudden the Mashiach bent down, because this incredible weight the sins of all those neshamas were on his head, on his neck. And what happened to the Mashiach? He started crying and screaming, and he started screaming and crying, and his voice went up to heaven. I mean, we can do, the suffering was obviously almost indescribable. So Omar Lafonov, so the Mashiach says to God, he says, Kamo Yehei Koichi, how much strength do I have? Come on. Kamo Yehei Ruchi, how much spirit do I have? Kamo Yehei Nishmosi, and how big do you think Amishama is? I mean, I can't tolerate this. I was just kidding around a little, or I didn't expect this. Kamo Yehei Evorai, and what do you think about my organs? Do you think I can tolerate this? Right? Loi bosav adoma noichi? Am I not a human flesh? There he is, Mashiach is human, right? So it says, okay, and then it says, Be'oisa shor oman HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So at that moment when Mashiach started complaining, he said, I didn't bargain for this, right? So oman HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so God says, Ephraim Mashiach Tzidki. Again, he's talking about Mashiach ben Yosef. Kva kibaltu lecha, hey, you accepted it, the deal's done. You can't retract now. I got your signature here. You accepted this from Sheshis Yimei Breishis, from the beginning of creation. So meanwhile the Mashiach is screaming, okay, Achshav, so God says to him to placate him. Achshav yehei tzar shelcho k'tzar sheli. Okay, I want to tell you something. Your tzar, talking to Mashiach ben Yosef, will be like my tzar, right? Which is the tzar of the Shechina. So from here you begin to see the unbelievable tzar of God. Shebeyoim she'olo Nebuchadnezzar HaRasha, and the day that he stood up and he destroyed my Beis HaMikdash, and he destroyed Yerushalayim, and he exiled all the people, my children, between the Umas HaOlam, right? I have never sat down on my throne. That's the pain that I feel, that I can't even sit on my throne. At that moment when God's obviously trying to appease him and say, listen, I'm also suffering. Kaviyochel, the Ravansham, Omar Lafonov. So the Mashiach ben Yosef said to God, Rebbeinu Shalom, Achshav nisyashvo daiti olai. My mind is now set at rest. Why? Ki dayoy li eved shiyeh karaboy. Because it is sufficient for an eved to be in the same situation of suffering as his master. And if his master is suffering, then obviously I will allow that. So we have here the incredible situation where the Mashiach ben Yosef, he's the greatest of the Sovli Choloim. He has accepted upon himself, that's be all the other tzaddikim and so on, that they're trying to help out Klal Yisrael. He has accepted that on himself, and he's considered the greatest of the Sovli Choloim. It's an incredible medrash, just to read this and so on, But we realize what he realized, he was makabel, what he's about to go through, And this explains many ideas. Why is it many tzaddikim say that when they die, they're going to go and storm heaven, right? And they're going to talk to the Mashiach, hey, you got to come. I mean, why is Klal Yisrael suffering? Right? So what they do is, they die and they go up to heaven, and they go to the Mashiach and they say, come on, what does it take to bring you? So the Mashiach says to them, you want me to come? I'll come, no problem. Okay? But remember, if I come, that's the end of my Yisurin, which means that there are many Jews that won't make it to Ilam Haba, because I'm the guy that's supposed to get them there. So once I come, then I come as a redeemer, correct? If I come as a redeemer, then I renounce, obviously, the ability to suffer for them, and therefore, who knows how many hundreds of thousands of Jews will not get into Ilam Haba. That's what he tells the tzaddik. So obviously what the tzaddikim say is, okay, sorry, I take back what I said, you just keep doing on your job. So that's, Medrash again shows you, which is very important. Then I might as well bring you the next Medrash, which I have quoted already, and this we can all thank Obama. And this is the place where that Medrash is. Rab Yitzchak. So I might as well bring it because we all makaras a toy for this. Shana Shemelech HaMashiach Nigla Boy, the year that the Mashiach reveals himself. Okay? Kol Malchi Umas Oilam Mizgan Zebezer. The entire world will be inciting each other. the Melech Poras, Persia, which is Iran, Misgar b'Melech Arvi, he will incite a battle with the king of Arabia, and the king of Arabia will go to Edom to seek Eitzah, advice. What do I do? Choza Melech Poras, the king of Persia, which is Iran, will begin to be machrives kol ha'olam, begin to destroy the world, is what it says, right? That Persia, which is Iran today, will begin to destroy the world. I mean, when you read this Medrash 20, 30 years ago, you said this is impossible. But today, with nuclear weapons, thanks to Iran, this is exactly what's happening in front of us, right? He has enabled Iran to destroy the world. And it said in the Medrash that he will begin, right, to destroy the world. And then it says the entire world are going to be unbelievably agitated, panic, because they don't know what to do. And then it says Klal Yisrael, they're also going to be panicking, and they're going to say, well, what should we do? We don't know what to do, right? Where should we go? And then God is a baskol going to come out and say, B'ni, my children, do not be afraid. Everything that I have done for you, I did only for your sake, which obviously is the end of time, and therefore do not be afraid. Higia zman gulaschem, the time of your redemption has arrived. From this medrash and the Gula Rishona, and this redemption will not be like the first redemption from Egypt, because the first redemption from Egypt, they still had to go through exile. But this redemption will no more, ever again, have an exile. It will be a total redemption. From this medrash, you see clearly that Persia or Iran is going to obviously try to destroy the world and whatever. Doesn't mean the entire world, not necessarily. What it does mean is they can threaten Europe. They can threaten Saudi Arabia. They just have to threaten the oil reserves, right? This medrash was written 2,000 years ago. But this is really what Obama has done. He has allowed the fulfillment of this medrash by enabling Iran to even threaten the world, even economically. That's a threat. It doesn't have to be a physical threat. That time, in the end, God will allow the Or Mashiach to appear, and all of them will appear. They'll witness the light. It's always talking about the Or Mashiach, because that's really what he does. Where it says that the nations of the world will come and fall at the feet of the Mashiach, and at the feet of Klal Yisrael, and fall at the feet of Klal Yisrael. And they're going to say, we want to be slaves to you. Imagine, at the end of the world, Shanu, we learned that Rabbeinu Asidim, Shanu Rabbeinu, our sages taught us, and this is Moed Zach, Asidim, the Ovos, Ha'olam, Lamed ben Nisan, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they will stand up, they will arise in Nisan, and they are going to say to this is at the end of time, and they're going to say, Ephraim Mashiach Tzidkenu, Mashiach ben Yosef, Afa Pisha Anu Avasecha, even though we are your forefathers, even of the Mashiach ben Yosef, obviously, right? Ato Toiv Mimenu, you are greater than us. This is what they're saying to the Mashiach ben Yosef. Why? Shesovalto avoinus benenu, because you have suffered for the sins of our children. V'ovru olecha, and what has transpired with you is midos koshois, terrible decrees, and that's Yisurin, v'rois, and evil. Ma'ashalei ovru al rishonim achronim, and this stuff that happened to you has never happened to any of the rishonim or the achronim. Then it says that God will take the Mashiach ben Yosef and lift him up and give all kinds of rewards. That's the Alkut. First of all, Mashiach. We know there are two Mashiachim, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben Yosef comes first because his job is to clean up the mess. He contends with evil, with the Satan and the nations of the world, and he surpasses them, and he not destroys them, but he conquers them. And then once they are, and he destroys the Satan. Actually, the Mashiach ben David does that. And then after him, there's Mashiach ben David, who ushers in, of course, the Messianic era. Mashiach ben Yosef basically has 4 jobs. You see that from Moshe Rabbeinu, who was Mashiach ben Yosef in his day. His job is Kibbutz Goliath, to take back all the exiles of Klal Yisrael, back to Eretz Yisrael. The second job of Ben Yosef is to build the Beis HaMikdash. The third job is to reveal the Messianic light. And the fourth job is the redemption itself. And that's really what Moshe Rabbeinu did, if you really think about that. Took him out of Egypt, right? Which, it's to destroy the nations. That's one of his jobs. He destroyed Egypt, 1. Took him out to Eretz Yisrael, two, even though he never got there, but he took them to Eretz Yisrael as two. He gave them the Orishim, the three, and in many ways he began the formation of Klal Yisrael. Then Mashiach ben David ushers in the Messianic era, and then that era is just beyond belief, as you will see. There's a machlokes if he will or will not die. Gemara is apparently, but the Zohar says he won't die, and the Goyin says he won't die. Ramchal. First of all, and the reason, where do we know that? Because there's when Yaakov thought Yosef was dead, so he said, Oid Yosef Chai. Oid Yosef Chai, I mean, I thought Yosef was dead. So the Goyin says, that's the remez, brings him Kol HaTorah. Oid Yosef B'ni Chai, he's still alive. So that means that Yosef should have died, but he didn't. There were 10 drops that emanated from him, and that was a tremendous kilkel. So therefore, the Asura Haruga Malchus really have to die for those 10 drops, because it was a tremendous pagam or whatever, even though he remained a tzaddik. That's not the question. And Rabbi Akiva, he was the greatest of the Asura Haruga Malchus, and Akiva ben Yosef, interesting. And what the Rebbeinu Shem did, so the death sentence of Mashiach ben Yosef, which is really terrible for Klal Yisrael, because if he dies, then the Jews are also destroyed. Not all of them, but terrible. So what the Rebbeinu Shem did, Goyin, the Ramchal, and the Ari and so on, that he won't die, a lot of it is because we are praying. We pray as Semach David, the offspring of David, which is Mashiach ben David. Semach David, Avdecho, Meir Satzmiach, Vekano, and so on, Torah Mishusecho, Shmon Esrei. So Semach David is Mashiach ben David. Semach is Mashiach ben Yosef. So in all our tefillas, we pray that the Mashiach ben Yosef does not die, as a representative of the Nisoyan of those 10 drops which emanated and so on. Instead you had the Asura Ruga Malchus and so on. I don't get into the whole thing, but they in many ways stood for that. So whatever's left from Mashiach ben Yosef as a kapora for those 10 drops and so on, what the Moshe does is he brings him back in many Gilgulim, and in each Gilgul he suffers. So if you cumulative, added up all the suffering of Mashiach ben Yosef in all the Gilgulim, it would kill him. But since he spreads it out, he does not die. He survives. That's an important idea. Like I said, the remez for that, the illusion for that, is when Yaakov said, Oy Yosef Chai, my son Yosef still lives. That's the remez. By the way, if he would have died, so Klal Yisrael would also have suffered terribly, because it says only 1 or 2 families in a city will survive. But what the Rebbeinu Shem did is he did the same thing. Just like by Mashiach ben Yosef, what did he do? He brings him back many times, right? And as a result of that, it's spread over, so he doesn't die. Cumulative, he would have killed him, but since it's spread over, he doesn't die and he will survive. So therefore, the Messianic war is also spread over. You know that. We have already had 2 Messianic wars, Gog and Magog, but the only one, Gog and Magog is missing. I should say Mashiach ben Yosef and Gog. You know what the wars are? World War I was Messianic. It took away from the heat of this sentence of Ben Yosef. World War II and Lo'asad Lovay World War III, which is the war Gog and Magog, which I spoke about as Iran and Israel and so on. But that won't be a war in terms of killing. It'll be a war probably of whatever, threats and so on and so forth. Anyway, so that really happened. Anyway, so he won't die. And I'm not referring, by the way, to his suffering for the Klal Yisrael. That's a different cheshbon, as they say. Anyway, so who is the Mashiach? What is he really? Adam Arishan, we know a neshama has 5 parts. It has nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida, 5 parts, and each one is connected to a world, a metaphysical world, a spiritual world. Asiya, Bria, Asiya, Yitzira, Bria, Atzilus, and what's called Adam Kadmon, which is Olam Haba. That's why we have 5, because we're connected to all the Alamas, including the spiritual worlds. So Adam Rishon had the totality of everybody in him. His neshama, all of it, right? And neshama is also a collective term, as well as an individual term of the 3rd part. There's nefesh, ruach, neshama, chayin, yechida. So neshama is referred to as the 3rd part, but neshama, as the soul, refers to the entire thing collectively. Anyway, so what happened is that the yechida, right before Adam Rishon sinned, the yechida, which is highest part of the neshama, flew away. So it was never contaminated by the sin. Thank God for that. That flew away. Now, so therefore, the Mashiachin, Ben Yosef, Ben David, who are they? There are many neshamas in Klal Yisrael. The great neshamas of Klal Yisrael is Moshe Rabbeinu and the two Mashiachim. In other words, they cover an enormous amount of expanse of the spiritual worlds. Mashiach ben Yosef, he comes from Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef HaTzadik, his neshama was enormous. It was a half a patriarch, as I had mentioned in the last year, and it's enormous. So therefore, that's called the Yesoid of Mashiach ben Yosef. That's the foundation neshama. From that neshama gives off what's called sparks, but enormous sparks, and these are called shroshim, okay, roots. And these roots, so the Mashiach ben Yosef has a root shorish neshama of Yosef HaTzadik. So Yosef HaTzadik is the block, so to speak. The tremendous section or part that he has is called a shorish, right? And Mashiach ben Yosef is a person that has that Yisoid of Yosef and the section should call a root, okay? And then he gets one half of the Yechid of Adam Rishon. Yechid of Adam Rishon splits. One half goes to Mashiach ben Yosef. The other half goes to Mashiach ben David. So the person who winds up being the Mashiach has the neshama of Yosef. He has the neshama, the shorish neshama that comes from Yosef.
Is he Gilgal of Yosef?
No, he's not a Gilgal of Yosef, but he's a chelik of the neshama. And the third thing he has is called the Yechid of Adam, half. And the Yechid of Adam is the collective Yechida of all Klal Yisrael. That is the crown of Mashiach. So, Ben David, his Yesoid neshama is Yehuda. He has a shorish, okay, and he gets the other half of the Yechid of Adam Rishon, the highest part of the neshama. So together, they have the blocks of Yosef and Yehuda. They are shorish neshamas, which means that they can become a candidate to be Mashiach. But in order to be the Mashiach, they have to have the Yechid of Adam. So the real Mashiach, the crown of Mashiach ben Yosef and ben David, is the Yechida. If you get it, you are. If you don't, you're just a shorish. What we have to also remember is that every generation has a shorish of ben David and ben Yosef. Why? Because we know that Klal Yisrael can bring the Mashiach in one of two ways. Either b'achishena, which means if they do mitzvahs, if Klal Yisrael does mitzvahs and the tzaddikim and so on, then the Mashiachim will come through schus, merit, right? If they don't do that and they sin, then ultimately he will come, and that's called be'ito in its time. So there's a guarantee. So Klal Yisrael can bring the Mashiach anytime if they do tshuva and they do mitzvahs and so on. It's when so that's called b'achishena. I will hasten it. But if Klal Yisrael doesn't do that, instead they sin and therefore they get Yisurin and all that, then the two Mashiachim will come be'ito in its time, which is the last guaranteed time that he will come. He must come, because God swore, "Umevi goel in Shemon Esrei," and he will bring Redeemer, "Leman shemoy bi'ahavo," for his great name's sake. And he swore to the others that no matter what they do, he will bring the Mashiach. Of course, the question is, how do they deserve it? And the answer is either mitzvahs, tshuva, or yisurin. That's it. The Yechid of Adam Rishon is the Yechida of all the Jewish people, which is astounding. And that's how they are able to connect to every Jew. It's like Moshe Rabbeinu ultimately was the neshama of all Klal Yisrael. Okay, so we know who the Mashiachim are, at least Kabbalistically. And we know in every generation there's always been David, Sherish, candidate, and candidate Ben Yosef. And if in that generation they are found worthy, then they become the Mashiachim. If not, then they will pass on, and there are other Shroshim that will take their place. But it's always the same mechanics, as they say. Moshe Rabbeinu was Moshe Rabbeinu was more than that, but he was certainly Mashiach ben Yosef. The real question is, who would have been Mashiach ben David if they hadn't done the Egel? That's an interesting conjecture. But in any case, we know also Shaul was Mashiach ben Yosef. That's why Shaul was king. Because the question is, how could you make Shaul king, right? If it's only in Yehuda. Sosa Shevet mi Yehuda, that it can only come from Yehuda, and Shaul is from Binyamin. And the answer is, because Binyamin is one of the children of Rachel, and Bnei Rachel can be Mashiach ben Yosef. Actually, anybody can be Mashiach ben Yosef, but certainly, and therefore Shaul was Mashiach ben Yosef. He failed because of the whole situation of Agog, Amalek, and so on. So therefore, there are various other people that were candidates. One of the candidates, by the way, was Shimshon. Shimshon was Mashiach ben Yosef. That's why without getting into it, and there was a whole arrangement, and that's why we see by Yaakov when he was given the brachas, the blessings to Shvatim. So when he came to Don, he said, all of a sudden, Don Yod Namoy, and he'll judge his people, and all of a sudden he says, Lishuascha Kvis Hashem. So Rashi says, because he saw Benevuah, that Shimshon that comes from Don is going to sin. And he realized that Shimshon can't be Mashiach ben Yosef, so he said, okay, we have to wait for your salvation. So it comes out that Shimshon, people like to look at Shimshon as, right, the strong man of Klal Yisrael, which he obviously was, but he was really Mashiach ben Yosef. That's really what he was. And the job of Mashiach ben Yosef, we know, is always to go into the Klippa and to go to the Tumah, whatever, to remain righteous and to subdue evil and destroy, which is exactly what Shimshon did in terms of the Philistines. Okay, who's the next candidate? So I mentioned a couple, right? Then it was Yerubim ben Nevat. In fact, the Ramchal says in Yerubim ben Nevat became a tremendous sinner, and he made all Israel sin. That's the story in Nach. The Ramchal says that he was the closest ever to become Mashiach ben Yosef. Astounding. Because Yerubim ben Nevat. What? Could you imagine that?
Getting the Yechida,
Yeah, almost. Yeah, he says, the Ramchal says that Yechida almost came on this man. We don't even know who this person was. It says that he and Achya Shiloini used to learn. Achya Shiloini was dead. Or was he dead at that time? He lived 500 years. But they learned in a field, and the learning that they learned, Yerub Menavat, and I think Achya Shiloini, I think it was Achya Shiloini. I don't think it was Eliyahu Novi, but it was so incredible that the Malachim came down to listen to their Chidushim. I mean, and this is Yerubim ben Nevat that forced Israel to worship idols and so on. We have no idea. But anyway, so what the Rebbe Shem did, which was interesting, Ramchal says this, he took Yerubim ben Nevat and he brought him back in Gilgulim, into Goyim. So when the Jewish neshama is an neshama of a Goy, really the Goy is Jewish. And then, eventually, whatever, and that's a tremendous suffering for the neshama of a Jew that goes into the body of a goy. Anyway, so Yerubim ben Nevat was Nizgalgal in Goyim. Okay, and when did he come back in Klal Yisrael? With the father of Rebbe Akiva ben Yosef. The father, I think is a father, I'm not sure if it's a father, who was a ger, by the way. He was the Gilgal of Yerubim ben Nevat. And eventually Rebbe Akiva would have been the candidate also. And so on. There are people that could have been Mashiach ben Yosef. One of them was Ezra, a Sofer, also Mashiach ben Yosef, and you see Chazal allude to that. And then you have Rabbi Akiva and so on, probably the Ari, and I'm certain the Ramchal was a Shurish and so on. So there are Shroshim you can identify, but none of them made it because Klal Yisrael wasn't Roy. So they never got the Yechida. So in the end, obviously, we're coming down to as we say, we're coming down to the wire, which is Bitoy. So whoever the candidate in today's time is, whoever's the Shurish, if this generation will be Bitoy, which we all hope it is, and he will get the Yechida. Whoever's a Shurish of Ben Yosef doesn't know he's a Shurish. So he's not Mashiach, he's not informed. Mashiach himself will be informed that, by the way, you're Mashiach, which means obviously I have to be a Shurish. And if I'm Shurish, that means then Yosef Atzadik or Yehuda have to be connected to me. But obviously they were not informed, so they don't know. They were tremendously gedolim, incredible gedolim, in the time of the last 20 years. Incredible people, And Klal Yisrael has had incredible gedolim, tzaddikim. Okay, so those are the candidates. Now, we now begin to understand something that I read in the Yalkut. The Mashiach is hidden. Why? The first reason why he's hidden, right, is because of what's called kitrugim. Because if the Satan knows who the Mashiach is or who the Shurish is, what do you think he's going to do all day? Try to destroy this guy. You know what I'm saying? He's trying to kill him, destroy him or whatever. So that's why many times you find the Mashiach is born in circumstances which are clearly or look clearly to be sinful. You have the classics, You have Lot and his daughters, right?
Moshe Rabbeinu was
Yeah, I'm going earlier to Lot. Lot was earlier. Last time I checked. So you have Lot and his daughters, and from them came Moav. From Moav came Rus, the mother of, ultimately the Malchus and so on, the David HaMelech. That comes through Tumah, and then after him is Yehuda and Tamar, right? She gives birth to parents and so on, right? And Yehuda and Tamar, was clearly is a sin, but the Medrash says it wasn't, because God forced Yehuda to have relations with his daughter-in-law. He was an onus. without going into the Medrash. And of course, he gave birth to parrots and so on and so forth, and that is a forerunner of Boaz, and so on, the same idea and so on. Then of course you have Moshe Rabbeinu, who was born at a time that all the Jews are dying, because Paro decreed that he should kill all the firstborn. This is all to hide the Mashiach, in order to, it should be Ketrugim. So the Satan either doesn't see it because it's sinful, or he's too busy prosecuting Klal Yisrael to have the Jews killed in the time of Paro, So it's all to hide the man, and so on. Then you have, of course, David HaMelech, who everybody thought was a mamzer. We know that, right? The whole Medrash and so on, right? And then it's only when Shmuel HaNavi came to anoint in the house of Yishai, the whole incredible Medrash where, he comes to the house and he says, okay, God said that one of your kids is going to be the king of Israel. So, of course, he lined them all up. And Shmuel was the incredible Navi, went by each one, nothing happening. So he said to Yishai, he said, you got somebody else as a kid? Is there somebody else in your family, So Yishai said, yeah, I have my youngest son, his name is David, and he's out in the field tending the sheep, which itself, I told you, gather your kids, because one of them is going to be king of Israel, and he's out there tending the sheep. And of course, that was David HaMelech, because everybody thought he was a mamzer, if you remember the Medrash, which I'm not going to go into. And of course, when David HaMelech came into the house, Shmuel HaNavi looked at him, and he must have been at the other end of the room. The oil the anointing oil jumped out of his hand, Shmuel, and went straight across the room. Could you imagine? What an Olympic jump, huh? And just fell right on top of his head, and it just anointed him. I mean, what else is there to say after that, right? So again, you have David HaMelech, and then of course you have many. You have Yerovam ben Nevat, although he was known and so on and so forth, and all through the generations, people who, and it always seems to come to Tumah or whatever and so on. I mean, even Rabbi Akiva, who also was a Sherish, he came through, he was a Ger. He was an Amoritz basically for 40 years. I mean, who expects him to be a Mashiach, right? Yet he is the responsible, he's the cause of Torah Shabbat Peh. It's beyond belief what this man knew, right? And at 40 years old, he was an Amoritz. I mean, I always like to look at this as God has an incredible sense of humor. Where the least guy you think is Mashiach, he's the guy, and that's why you have Rebbe, they say certain Rebbes are Mashiach. So I once told the guy, well, the fact that you actually say he's Mashiach probably means he's not, because you're expecting him to be in. And the pasuk really is like David HaMelech's pasuk in Hallel, which we said today. Even moasu haboinim hoisu al ishpino. That's really what it is. The stone that was despised by the builders became the cornerstone. That's what the Mashiach does. The Mashiach conceals this man, so there's no kitrugim. But there's a second reason why, and you now know from the Yalkut. Because the Mashiach ben Yosef, much more than Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David doesn't suffer the same way as Mashiach ben Yosef. He suffers in Shemayim, where his neshama is denied access to incredible ore. But that's a spiritual suffering. Mashiach ben Yosef is a physical suffering. He's a real person. Like he says, Leibosav Adama Noichi. He's clearly referring to himself as a real person, right? And I'm suffering. So the Mashiach ben Yosef suffers physically. And I read the Yalkut, the Medrash, right? And you see what the suffering is. It's astounding to watch. It's an oil basel, and that oil basel obviously is metaphoric. It's a metaphor. Doesn't mean he's walking around with a yoke, It'd be interesting to see some guy walking around with a yoke, and they ask him, who are you? It's Mashiach ben Yosef, because it says you got to walk around with a yoke. Therefore, the reason why we don't see this is because Mashiach ben Yosef doesn't look like the guy. Like Rabbi Akiva was an Amoritz for 40 years old. Would you ever suspect? Imagine you meet him at 39 years old. He's a 39-year-old guy. He's a middle-aged man. And he doesn't have any prospects, nothing. And this guy winds up to be the transmitter of Torah Shabbat Peh. It's astounding what the Mashiach does. It's the same thing with Avram Avinu at 75. He's an old man at 75. Yet he becomes the forerunner of the whole nation of Israel, which is astounding. Mashiach ben Yosef, he suffers for Klal Yisrael, and therefore it's never apparent of who he is, because the guy that you meet looks like a regular guy, He's a regular guy, so how would you possibly know who he is? But I want to tell you something, what's important to know. To you, he looks like a regular guy. But he clearly in himself knows that there's something wrong here. Because we're not talking about a guy, I want to tell you something, when Rabbi Akiva became who he was, does that mean he had no potential? He had enormous potential, right? We're not talking about a guy who has like 103 IQ to start off with, We're talking about a guy who had incredible spiritual potential. It was nowhere, right? What was missing was the actualization of that potential. So Rabbi Akiva had to say to himself at some point in his life, what's going on here? I have a great head, I have a great memory, and I have tremendous spiritual proclivities, which means attractions. Why am I an Amoritz? He had to say that to himself. You know what I'm saying? If you think about that realistically, yeah, that's the type of person that Mashiach ben Yosef has to be. A guy who has tremendous spiritual potential and is completely blocked. He himself must feel that there's something wrong, that why isn't he successful, and what's happening here? Because like I say, we're not talking about an average guy. We're talking about a guy who has incredible potential. It's a very important concept, I'm telling you. Don't underestimate it. But in any case, and therefore he himself probably suspects, but suspecting is one thing, and being is another. The Mashiach ben Yosef, whoever the guy is, whoever he is, has two phases. There's Mashiach Bilkilkuloi, in his destructive, deformed phase. That's Bilkilkuloi. That's the inyan of the Yisurim that the Yalkut, the Medrash talks about, is the whole Yisurim. And like the Ova said to him, which is amazing, you're greater than us, you see, because the Gzeris on you were terrible, severe, and bad. You see, then they tell that to the Mashiach ben Yosef. So therefore, that's Mashiach b'Kilkuloi. But the Mashiach now, obviously, when he gets the Yechida, is called b'Tikunoi. He has a tikkun. You see, he's changed. So the Mashiach ben Yosef has to grow. What am I talking about? Rehabilitation. The Mashiach ben Yosef has to be rehabilitated. People think that all of a sudden some guy's going to be coming, I hate to say it, but riding on a white horse, or maybe driving in a Lexus, a white Lexus. Today it would be a white Lexus instead of a white horse. You take a guy like this, where the office admit that he's much worse off than they are, and it's incredible, right? And you talk about the Moshem, he's screaming, I got to get out of this because I'm dying here. You know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden, he's released. He's got to go to rehab, right? What's his rehab? That's the question, right? That's fascinating what his rehab is. So his rehab is what? So the Pasuk says what is rehab. So in Yeshayahu, in Nun Beis, Pasuk Yud Gimel, it says over there that the Mashiach, that the nations of the world, in fact everybody, including Jews, are going to look at this guy and say, excuse me, you are Mashiach? I can't believe this, right? And then the Pasuk says, incredible. It says what? Hine Yaskel Avdi, behold, my servant will grow wise. So the servant is a machlokes. Rashi and other Mefoshim say, my servant will grow wise and he will change. Rehab, right? That's Klal Yisrael, which is true. But the Targum says it's Malka Mashiach. It's Mashiach. So it can go on both, but it really goes on Mashiach. Why? Because it says V'yoram, and he will grow. V'niso, and he will grow exceedingly. V'gova mi'oid, and he will become exceedingly high. So the Medrash says on that, what does that mean? Remember, we're talking about the rehab of the Mashiach. B'tikunoi. So V'yora means, and he will become greater than Avram Avinu, which means he will know more than Avram Avinu. Now he will become greater than him. I mean, for that already is like, he's otherworldly. And then it says, V'niso, he will be greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. Now that already is beyond belief. So what's the V'gova mi'oid? He will be greater than the Malachim. He will know more, greater Kedusha, be greater spiritually than the Malachim themselves, while he's living on earth. I mean, you talk about a rehab center, right? That's the Mashiach B'tikunoi. You see? So that's what's going to happen to him. You know, what's interesting, and that's in Yeshayahu. So what we see, therefore, is that this is who he is. Now, what's interesting is, I once saw a statement by Rav Kaduri. Rav Yitzchak Kaduri, he was nifter many years ago. He was the greatest of the Mikubolim. He was called the Rosh HaMikubolim when he was alive. He lived to 108 or whatever the age he was. A tremendous person. Tremendous Makubal. And he once made a statement which I saw written, about what he said about Mashiach. So here's what he said. It's interesting, He said the Mashiach is going to be a person that will become known, not as Mashiach, but somehow his name will get out there. As an unusual person or whatever, And then he's going to disappear from the public. That's what he says, And then he says, and then all of a sudden, he's going to become known again. And slowly, it's going to become more and more apparent who he is. And he says people are going to look at this guy and say, "You're Mashiach? I can't believe this." In other words, you're talking about a guy who's, nobody would ever suspect he's Mashiach. You see? And the truth is, you see that. When the brothers came to Egypt, and they finally came to Yosef, right? So Yosef was going to reveal himself. What did he say? Ani Yosef. And they were stunned. That's exactly how the Mashiach is going to reveal himself. Ani Yosef. I am Yosef. That is the viceroy of Egypt. And they were absolutely, like the Torah says, they were just dumbstruck. That's the Gilu of the Mashiach ben Yosef, which is a very important concept. So therefore we see, and now Yosef, he was a viceroy of Egypt. I guarantee you, he looked like an Egyptian. However they walk around, he's a viceroy, right? Would you ever suspect that an Egyptian that spoke Egyptian, looked like an Egyptian, right? Knew the Egyptian culture, and is the viceroy, that he's the Messiah? Impossible. Yet he was the Mashiach, which is incredible. And not only that, if you think about that, how quick was his revelation? It's amazing, Finally, Paro had a dream in Miketz, right? And in one pasuk, he went from the lowest social status in Egypt, which is a prisoner. In one pasuk, Vayiritzu men abor, they shaved him, dressed him, and right in front of Paro. This must have happened in 2 hours. He went from what's called a bor amikta, the lowest pit, to Igur Rama, to the highest roof, in one pasuk. You see, when the Rebbe Shem finally wants to do this, he's not going to dilly-dally. Well, think about it. Maybe I'll give it to a committee. Let them decide, and then we have to take a vote with the committee, right? And then we have to do with the appeals, and all this kind of, no. It happened in 3 hours. He was gone. Just think about that. The koyach of God. Because you figure, how are you going to get out of prison? He needs lawyers. He needs the appellate division, right? And then maybe the Supreme Court to get him out of prison. It's going to take years. With the Rebbe Shem, nothing takes years. In the blink of an eye. And that's what happens. Ani Yosef, nobody knows that this person can even dream about being Yosef, and it happens in the blink of an eye. That's what's going to happen in the end of time. The reason why you'd never suspect, like I said, is because he's got the yoke of which decimates the guy. Who knows what this guy's going through, and decimates the guy and so on. And then, of course, what happens is he reveals the Orishim. Let me tell you what the Ramchal says, since I'm talking about Mashiach. What he says. What does it mean Kabbalistically? I'll just tell you. Because it means that Yesoid, the sphere of Yesoid, which is Ben Yosef, goes into Malchus. It's funny. We say V'yipoked v'yizocher. In Maitan Hallel, Mashiach ben David, right? We say Mashiach ben David. In Yalaviyova, right? We say that. The Ramchal says that V'yipoked and V'yizocher are two different. There's what's called the Pekida and the Zechira. The Pekida is when the sphere of Yesoid finally comes into Malchus, which is the real way the world works. And that's the first redemption. What that means is that the Neshama, the Yechid of Adam Rishon, will enter this individual that's Mashiach ben Yosef. That's called the Pekida. The Zechira is when Tif'eres joins Yesoid in Malchus, and that's the Shekhinah is released. Exactly. There are two things that have to be released, like we see from the Medrash. Mashiach ben Yosef is in the Klippa, that's number one, which means he's in the Tumah. And the Rebbeinu Shalom is not in the Tumah, but at the Tzav, the Shechina, he's also in prison. That's why it says, and God will restore your captivity. It doesn't say God will restore your captivity. It's God will return with your captivity. Because he's also in what's called the Klippa. It's also called Shechinta B'Galusa. That the Rebbeinu himself doesn't occupy a seat. So the Shechin itself is... So the first Geula is the Mashiach himself gets the Yechida, and he's released. He's Mashiach. That's it. And you should know, once that happens, it is unstoppable and irreversible. It's over. There's no force in the universe when it's Be'itoi, because that's the will of God. Nothing can stop it. It's like I say, it's unstoppable, it's irreversible once that Be'itoi happens. But the first thing that happens is that the Mashiach is released from the Klippa, which is all the oil and so on, right? And he gets Yechida. So he now knows who he is. And then the second thing that happens is the Shechin is released, because that's a greater Kedusha. And that's called Tferes in the Yesod Malchus. All of it is a Malchus. And when the Shechin is released, get out of the way. Even when Ben Yosef is released, and so on. And that's it. It's unstoppable, it's irreversible. And that's what you see by Yosef HaTzadik. Remember the famous pasuk? V'chol asher osa hitzliach Hashem b'yodoi. Everything he did, God made successful. That's Ben Yosef. Once he is, even that he actually happened when he was in prison. But he has that bracha. That's why, how do you know who the Mashiach will be? Because whatever he does must succeed. It's impossible to fail, because that's Be'itoi. And that's how you know he's Mashiach. Exactly. You know, he succeeds, and that's how you know. Once that happens, what happens? Then we are looking at the Or Mashiach. You know, he will bring down this incredible Or, enlightenment, consciousness. He will change the consciousness of Klal Yisrael. That's what he does, which is a very important concept. Now, what is the Or Mashiach? And really I've been angling toward this concept. What is the Or Mashiach? I once said, the Or Mashiach is something which is not comprehensible to us. Because it says, Kimol Oretz Deus Hashem. And the earth, Kimol Oretz Deus Hashem, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters covers the seabed. What does that mean? So the Medrash says an incredible thing. It's the end of Koheles, the Medrash Rabbah, the end of Koheles. It says, the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is what? It's 300,000 Sfarim, right? 300,000 Sfarim, Moshe Rabbeinu, which is astounding. Bavli, Yerushalmi, Halacha, you name it. It's a totality of Torah. So the Medrash says that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is everything we know, is Hevel, Luft, air, compared to the Torah of Mashiach. Could you imagine what that is? Air has no substance. It's compared to the Torah. It's like air, substance, compared to. It's not even a comparison, right? So that's his Or. And that Or is going to be revealed in Olam Hazeh, in this world, while we're alive, right? And wait a minute. That kind of consciousness, that type of enlightenment, nobody could bear that. Everybody will drop dead. Nobody could be sovel that Or. Because we're not talking here, by the way, let me tell you about religion, an experience that the world has never seen, because it's the end of time. Then in the same Medrash it says that the Torah of Mashiach is Hevel compared to the Torah of Olam Haba. So we have no idea even what's in Olam Haba. But we're not even, at least Olam Haba is spiritual. You know, you're not here, you're in Olam Haba. You know, the Or Mashiach, which is Torah Moshe, is Hevel compared to that, is Luft, air compared to that. That's Olam Hazeh. That's now. That's in the physical universe. What is that supposed to mean? We have no comprehension. So what we begin to understand is, wait a minute, you can't do this to the world. You kill everybody. You know, it's like taking a guy from New Guinea, one of these guys, natives of New Guinea. They never saw a white man before 1953, right? You take him, then, and you put him in Fifth Avenue on Manhattan, right? He'll have a heart attack. He can't assimilate what's going on. Guys, cars. I mean, it's like beyond belief. The same thing would happen to the whole world. In fact, When Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Luchas Rishonos, what was that? That was the Mashiach. And what happened to Klal Yisrael? They all died. Yes? Clearly then, Klal Yisrael needs a rehabilitation. Not just the Mashiach. Klal Yisrael needs that. Yeah, but wait a minute. Jews are gone. 11 million Jews are gone. You see? And even those that are here, I mean, how many religious Jews are there? You know, how many Orthodox Jews? How many Jews are there that know Torah? Forget about the enlightenment of Mashiach. They don't even know what the simple ideas of Tanakh and Mishnayos and Gemara and Shulchan Aruch. Therefore, what you begin to understand is a very important conclusion, is that Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, need to be rehabilitated. Not just the Mashiach himself, but the Jewish people now have to be rehabilitated, or else they'll all die. And they died once, they were resurrected. The purpose isn't that they should die. The purpose is Mashiach should come and redeem them while they're here. So that's a very important concept, that they have to be rehabilitated. So the question is, how are they going to be rehabilitated? What was the first rehabilitation? I will tell you. Most people don't realize this. When Yosef became the viceroy of Egypt, right? Pare was still in charge, right? Pharaoh, Pare. But what Pare did is he said to Yosef, you're in charge. The only thing that separates you from I is the chair, the throne. Other than that, you're in charge. Do you have any idea what the power of a Pharaoh was in Egypt? He was considered a god, right? He could do anything, basically. Therefore, he transferred that power to Yosef. Now, Yosef, being who he was, isn't going to take it very. He's not interested in being wealthy. We're talking about an incredible tzaddik, right? What Yosef always does, whether it's Jew or Goy, is to raise you spiritually. Because even a Goy has to be raised spiritually. So we can assume that Yosef raised the Egyptians morally, ethically, and he removed them in many ways from their klipa. Not totally, but he clearly raised Egypt. Why? Not only because of his personality, but for another reason. Because what the Baruch wanted really, why did the Jews go to Egypt? It's funny. We have an Agoda, on Pesach, and we thank the Baruch for taking us out of Egypt, right? Anybody ask what we're doing there in the first place? I mean, we thank you for taking us out, but excuse me, why? So the real reason why the Jews had to go to Egypt is because for 2,000 years mankind could do the tikkun, to rectify creation. The problem is, if you can rectify, you can destroy, because that's what it means to rectify. It means you can actually bring God in or push him away. So the problem is, for 2,000 years, what did mankind do? Instead of bringing him back, they pushed him away, correct? But more than that, they gave the kedusha that they would have brought down from their mitzvahs, they gave it to the Satan. The problem is that the Satan had all this incredible sparks of holiness, which I told you, right, that he's yoinek, that he could take from the kedusha of Klal Yisrael. At that time, he could take it from the Umas Olam, because they were the Masaknim. They were the ones that could do the tikkun to rectify creation. So the Rebbe Shem appeared to Avraham Avinu and said, excuse me, I want to tell you something. You are going to be my rectifier. And Avraham Avinu says, hey, that's fabulous, because you're the only one doing it. But then the Rebbe Shem, by the way, rectification means not just from here on in. It means you got to undo everything, the 2,000 years of mankind. So Avraham Avinu says, what did they do? Well, I'll tell you what they did. They gave the Satan an incredible amount of Kedusha. You got to take it back to the side of Kedusha, holiness. Wow! That's beyond belief. So the Baruch Shem then told them, so Avraham Avinu said, you mean it's not just from here on in. We got to undo the damage or the kilkul that the nations of the world who could rectify creation, we got to undo that. This is what the Baruch Shem said to Avraham Avinu. You and your descendants will rectify creation. One. However, rectifying means you got to undo the damage caused by the previous rectifiers. And therefore, you need to go into a nation and remain righteous. And by that, you need to go into a nation that will be the firstborn of the Satan. You need to remain righteous. That's it. Just don't assimilate. And therefore, you will have rectified. That's why we had to go to Egypt, is to finish the job. But what happens if the Jews don't and they assimilate? Then va'avodim, they will do the tikkun to Yisurin. And if not, if that's worse, they will afflict them. But in the end, they will go out Rechush Gadol. And remember what I said Rechush Gadol is? The gematria of Yetz Rechush Gadol is gematria, the numerical value of Nitzoitze Kedusha, the sparks of holiness. That's a bingo. Because that's really what they took out. Now, but really for what the Baruch really want? He didn't want them to assimilate. He just said remain righteous. Yes? Had they done that and not assimilated, then Yetzias Mitzrayim would have been different. It's just interesting to think what would have happened. But that clearly was a contingency plan. Avodim and Inoisam is a contingency plan. He really wanted them just to be Geyet Yazaracha, just don't assimilate. And now let's go back to Yosef. Now that you understand this, so this was the beginning. But in order not to assimilate, here's what has to happen. You have Paroi, which is the Klippa, Egypt, because that they have to go into the Klippa, right, to remain righteous, right? And Yosef is being charged, yes, right? But wait a minute. In order for them not to assimilate, they have to be rehabilitated. Well, what happened? Vayechi Yaakov. And Yaakov lived, and Chazal say that what he did, Yaakov Avinu did, was beyond belief. He grew in stature and spirituality more than all the years before. The 17 years that he was in Egypt was an unbelievable, unrivaled spiritual growth. That was the rehabilitation, wasn't it? And therefore, but in order to do that, in order for Yaakov, and if Yaakov did that, then obviously not just Yaakov, but the Shvatim were rehabilitated, means enormous spiritual stature, and all the kids, means the whole Klal Yisrael had access to Yaakov and the yeshiva, and they were on incredible madrega. But in order to do that, he wanted to have Yosef in Paroi. Why? Because in order to have this type of spiritual reawakening, you need to have a climate of peace, prosperity, and tranquility. You need that. You know, if it's war or combat or anti-Semitism, nobody's going to grow. You're too busy trying to save your life. So what the Baruch did is incredible. He arranged that this would happen. Paroi, that's the Klippa, that's where the Jews have to go in to remain righteous, right? But Yosef is going to rehabilitate Klal Yisrael. And where was the rehabilitation? Vayechi Yaakov. That's where you see it, and that would be Gei Yezaracha. That would be enough. What happened? The Jews failed. They went down into the Memtes. Egypt collapsed, because obviously, and the Jews unfortunately went along with them, right? So therefore, it needed avodim. They will serve them Yisurin and Inuesam, and then the Jews can emerge. But the Jews still need rehabilitation. What's the difference? Because they had fallen from that lofty place. So what was the rehabilitation? And now you begin to understand. The Rashim couldn't give them Matan Torah. He had to rehabilitate them. So the first rehabilitation was the Makkos. For 1 year, Egypt suffered under the Makkos, right? And in that year, it wasn't just the Makkah, it wasn't just a blow to Egypt, it was a blow to Egypt and an incredible spiritual insight to the Jews. As it says, that wasn't just a physical light, that was an incredible spiritual hasaga. So for 1 year, they were being lifted. That was the 1 year of the Makkos. What is this process? Rehabilitation. Then what happens, right? Then you had Kriyas Yamsuf. And we know that a maidservant saw more of Kriyas Yamsuf than Yechezkel HaNovi saw. Correct? Wow, what an insight. What an enlightenment. So that was the second phase of the rehabilitation. But that rehabilitation, Kriyas Yamsuf, was beyond anything we can even possibly imagine. Right? And then the next rehabilitation phase was the 49 days. Yes? So that by the time they stood at Sinai, they were rehabilitated. They were on an unbelievable spiritual level. Okay? Now forget about why they did the golden calf. I'm not going to go into that. Therefore, they were ready, hopefully, to receive the Luchas Rishonis from Moshe Rabbeinu, right, from the Baruch Shem, the first tablets. And as it is, they died. With all this rehabilitation, they still died. Okay, you know, whatever. But what they saw is the Orishan. That's the Luchas Rishonis. So that's one. Now you understand what really happened in Egypt. The concept of Yosef, Vayechi Yaakov, and so on. But remember, rehabilitation basically has to take place in what? In a time of tranquility, which it did, Kriyas Yamsuf, and 49 days, whatever. When was the second time of rehabilitation? There was a second Tkufa. You know what that was? Mordechai and Esther. Yeah, let's take a look. Right? Jews were sinning, obviously, with the meal and all that. And they were under Achashverosh, which is Persia. So therefore, what did Rebbe do? After they finally were saved, right? Mordechai became the Sheni Lamelech. Right? Mordechai became incredibly great under Achashverosh. And everybody feared him. What did Mordechai do? Right? What he did was he instituted incredible peace and tranquility, where Klal Yisrael was now able to grow in Ruchnius. And that's what it means. Obviously, they achieved an incredible spiritual advancement to such an extent where had they come back with Ezra HaSofer, then Ezra HaSofer would have been Mashiach ben Yosef. That's how great they became spiritually. You see? So it's almost the same scenario as Egypt, where you have Mordechai on Achashverosh. There's peace and tranquility. There's an enormous amount of learning, especially if Mordechai is the second to the king, right? And it was so great that they were ready for Mashiach ben Yosef with Ezra HaSofer. Great. Now let's take a look at the third instance in time. I'm trying to show you how this repeats itself. But the interesting thing is that by Yaakov, that was right before the redemption. By Mordechai, that also was before the redemption. Chazal learned that out, that Ezra should have been Mashiach ben Yosef. Rashi even brings it out in Yechezkel, that second redemption, when the second Beis HaMikdash was going to be built, was a tekufa that the Mashiach could have come. Anyway, the third is, you know when? It's very interesting. Rabbeinu HaKodesh was very good friends with Antoninus. The Gemara says that, right? The whole Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Antoninus, Roman Empire. Rabbeinu HaKodesh was tight with the Roman Empire. Fascinating. Who is this Antoninus? Which Roman Empire? Right? Well, there's a Roman Empire called Marcus Aurelius. He was known as a philosopher. His name was really Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. The Doros HaRishonim, who's a history book, a very choshev history book, Jewish history, says that who was Antoninus. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, who ruled from 161 CE to 180 CE. And that person, Rome, which of course Israel was under Rome, it was after the Churban Bayis, right? That was Antoninus, who was incredible friends with Rebbe. But it's more than friends. It says that Antoninus served Rebbe. He was so taken by Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKodesh. I mean, we have no idea who Rabbeinu HaKodesh was, right? And he was taken with Rebbe. It says that when Rebbe would go into his bed, Antoninus would bend down, it's Gemara Avodah Zarah, and he would allow Rebbe to step on him. It's the Emperor of Rome, right? The greatest individual, right? He would step on him in order to get to his bed. So Rebbe once said to Antoninus, I can't use your malchus for this. It's totally disrespect. So Antoninus says, Alavayno ilam habo, I should be your mat. Forget about your footstool. I mean, you can imagine the hasaga. And Antoninus, how did he come with Rebbe? Rebbe's in Israel, in Judea, and Antoninus is in Rome. No, for a certain amount of time, Antoninus lived in Tveria. And it's said that Antoninus loved Rebbe, and not only that, he wanted to exempt, the Gemara Avodah says he wanted to exempt the Chachomim of Tveria from tax, so they could sit and learn, because he tremendously respected scholars, because he loved Rebbe. You believe this, a Roman emperor? So again, what do we have? We have Rome, Edom, don't we? Under Antoninus. Who is the Sheni Lamelech, so to speak? Rebbe, right? But where's the or? And the or is the Mishnayos. Here was the problem, right? The exile was increasing, right? And Rebbe realized that it's over. So because of Antoninus, there was a time of tremendous peace, prosperity, and tranquility, right? And Rebbe was very good friends. He was like the Sheni Lamelech, even though he wasn't, but Antoninus loved him. Rebbe was able to call all the Chachomim in this huge meeting, and each one would tell him their Mishnah, their oral law that they got from their Rebbe. Rebbe would take them all, and he chose the Mishnah that Rav Shri Cohen says. He chose the Mishnah text of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir. He felt that was the best, and he standardized everybody's Mishnayos into the Mishnayos that we have today, because they were all over the place. Each one had their own in their own style. So Rebbe realized it's not going to do if the Jews go into exile. So what he did is he created a text from all of them, but he's able to do that because it was in the time of Antoninus. Incredible. So that was the Enlightenment. So, and it's funny, that's Edom. So we see actually that Edom assisted the Jews to revamp their Torah and to have the text of Mishnayos. If you remember from the 2 shurim ago, so this was one of the few times in history that Edom went from Ya'aved, remember I told you then, to destroy, to Ya'avoid, truly Ya'avoid. In fact, where do we see that? Because the Torah says, right, Shnei goyim bivitneich, there will be two great nations, and Rashi brings down that it refers to Antoninus because they will be equal, Antoninus and Rebbe. So that's the third time you see where the klipa of Edom, remember you had the klipa of Mitzrayim, then you had the klipa on Achashverosh of Poras, and now we have the klipa of Edom, right, assisting. Maybe I haven't really. I'm really focused on Edom, just to get,
The Rambam also seems a little similar.
No. That's, the Rambam is different. Yeah, but I'm talking about a radical shift in the whole Klal Yisrael. And all these three people were Sheni Lamelech. All of them were right next to the king. So there was an incredible period of peace and tranquility. Got that? Remember. So the fundamental ideas is rehab. Rehab for Mashiach ben Yosef, rehab for Klal Yisrael, and the rehab for Klal Yisrael and Mashiach has to happen because of the Orishim that he's going to give. Or else Klal Yisrael the world cannot accept it. It would kill everybody. You can't take a person with that type of Kedusha and give it to him without being ready. We now can come back to current events. Wow. Let me tell you a possible scenario. The Jewish people are in the pits. 11 million Jews at least are gone. We know that. When I mean gone, I mean gone. Forget about knowing anything in Torah, the Machal Shabbos, whatever it is. I don't go through there and so on. But it's just absolutely terrible, the assimilation of the Jews. The assimilation, they're unaffiliated, the intermarriage, it's mind-boggling. And even in Eretz Yisrael, where you have so much counter against the Jews of Eretz Yisrael because of the Erev Rav and so on. I believe that this is about to happen. I hope I'm right. I may be wrong, because if I'm wrong, it's bad news for everybody. If I'm right, I think this is what's about to happen. Okay? The same scenario. Edom, the Klippa, somebody big will become attached to that. A tremendous resurgence of Torah, and that will be a hachonah for the Mashiach, for the rehabilitation. I believe Donald Trump, could be that figure. I realize it's way out, because I believe when he says, I want to make America great again, essentially what he's saying is peace, tranquility, and prosperity. Under that kind of climate, okay, somebody could arise and create an enormous resurgence of Torah in Klal Yisrael, without going into how and why. And as a result of that, in our days, there could be a tremendous rehabilitation of the whole concept of Geula Mashiachos. Because without the rehabilitation, Mashiach really can't come. Not in his tikkunoi. Yeah, in his kilkuloi, I believe that he probably here, and he's in his kilkul. He's still got this oil shel Basel on him and so on. But b'tikkunoi, when Yisoid merges into Malchus, Kabbalistically, and Tferes joins with them, which is v'yipoked, Bekida and Zechira, v'yipoked v'yizocher, that's tikkunoi, and that Klal Yisrael has to be rehabilitated, just like we see by Egypt. Klal Yisrael had to be rehabilitated, whether it was through Yosef himself, right, or Moshe Rabbeinu, and all the steps and so on. Klal Yisrael needs to be rehabilitated. To me, Donald Trump seems like the perfect figure. Think about that, right? He's wealthy, doesn't take bribes, doesn't need any of that, right? Everybody around him is almost Jewish. His son-in-law is Jewish. I heard that every one of his kids is married to a Jew. He has a daughter, Ivanka. She's Jewish and she's Orthodox, and so on. And then he's got a guy, Jason Greenblatt, who is chief counsel, who he now made the main liaison to Israel. He's an Orthodox Jew. It's incredible, So what does it take for a guy like him to defend the Jewish people and to create a climate that Klal Yisrael can be rehabilitated in whatever government funding that could be without mixing religion and state, whatever, right? But it's a perfect scenario if you think about that. And this scenario would replicate the previous scenarios, if you think about that. Because in all the scenarios, there always has to be some type of rehabilitation. And that rehabilitation has to take place in a time of a climate of tranquility, of peace, and of prosperity. And then guys can sit down and think about learning. How it will take place, how do you get the Jews out of their slumber is miraculous. I mean, look, when we talk about Be'itoi, we are no longer in Teva, in natural means. We are in complete miracles. And like remember when I said, the bracha by Yosef is v'chol she'oso, and everything he did, hitzliach Hashem biyodoi. Somehow, somebody's going to get it up there and rehabilitate Klal Yisrael miraculously. He'll have all the money he needs, right? He'll have all the the entire wherewithal, and it'll work. Somehow the hearts, like the Rosh says, Ki'im beruchi, I will change the Jewish people with my ruach. I will circumcise the heart of Omolis Levavam. I will circumcise their heart, which means that the Rosh will take away the Olah on their heart, which by the way is the Zoyama. He will take away that and enable them to have consciousness of spirituality, which is a miraculous concept. Something will happen where the world will rise, that they'll realize there's an incredible other domain called the Ruchnius, the spiritual domains. How that happens, whatever, is it's another discussion. But the main idea is I believe something like that will happen, and certainly can happen with this candidate. If Trump loses, and there's something else, there's a posuk in the Nevi'im. It says, "Berega kot nazavtich." In 1 second I will abandon you. Uberachmim gedolim akaptzech. But in incredible great mercy I will gather you. Which means that the Moshe doesn't always want to chase the Jews out of a country, fleeing for their lives. That's not Rachmim gedolim. Yeah, he's doing that with Europe. Why? Because Europe is the evil of Esav, if you remember what I said. But America is the Tov of Esav. I believe in Esav, the Jews will go back to Israel, not because they're fleeing for their lives, because of some terrible, economic situation, but they will go because of an incredible awakening, resurgence of Ruchnius, which in some way will happen because of Be'itoi. So that's what that posuk really refers to. And as far as I'm concerned, Trump is a perfect figure for that. A perfect figure. And maybe that's why he's Gematria Mashiach ben David, which I told you, and so on, 424, because he will be like Antoninus. In fact, I will say something which I think is outlandish, and it's pure speculation. Don't even hold me this. I would not be surprised if Trump is a Gilgul of Antoninus. This sounds, I mean, it's outlandish, I realize. It's probably outrageous, but what?
Antoninus was a tzaddik. I wouldn't say that about Trump.
Whatever.
Isn't he?
Because it says in the Zohar that the Moshe sends back many different peoples, to do the evil, to finally close the din on them. But it's not just the evil. The Moshe sends back many people who had a positive effect on Jews, and he wants to reward them further. The Zohar says this, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if he did that. Now, again, it's my speculation. Don't even think that I have proof for this, and so on. That's all. But it's a thought which is interesting, because I think Antoninus deserves to be sent back to finish the job, because what he did for Rebbe was incredible. You realize the Mishnayos is because of Antoninus? Rebbe, if Antoninus was a regular Roman Empire, they'd be like they did with Rebbe Akiva. They'd be killing Rebbe. He would have killed Rebbe. He killed Rebbe Akiva. What do you call it? Hadrian. Yamach Shemoy. Well, he killed the Esor Rigam Malchus. I mean, so therefore, you should know it was a Nes Nigla. It wasn't because Antoninus just happened to like Rebbe. It was a miracle min Hashemayim, because the Rebbe knew that Klal Yisrael can only survive if Rebbe writes the Mishnayos. But for that to happen, he can't run around hiding from the Romans. It's over with. So what he did, which is incredible, the power of God is awesome. He made Antoninus worship almost Rebbe. Wow, what a political stance, and so on. And in that climate, Klal Yisrael was Zoicha to Mishnayos. So if Antoninus did that, hey, I think the guy deserves another chance, right? Or maybe he deserves to finish the job. So anyway, that's a thought. It's my speculation. You know, I didn't get this binavur or anything like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's who he really is, and so on. But anyway, the main idea is I think it could happen. If he doesn't win the election, it's very bad news for Klal Yisrael. She will be terrible. She will destroy America. She will corrupt America, destroy it, because she's fundamentally a pathological liar, an unindicted felon. She's corrupt, as we see from her foundation, and so on. And she's incompetent, and so on, you know. And she's going to, a Supreme Court guy. Well, I once wrote that the gematria of, who, what'd you say? That, Vashti was very competent, let me tell you. I once had to give a whole shit who the Gilgal of Bill Clinton is. You never heard that shit, did you? I'm almost zicher that's who his Gilgal is. But anyway, that's another shit. Anyway, I didn't get into that shit. But anyway, it should be terrible. It should destroy America. And the problem is not only she will destroy America, she will be terrible for Israel. She will force Israel to give up who knows what. And she'll just carry on Obama, which is very bad for the Jewish people. And she'll put in people on the Supreme Court that will destroy the morals of America, which they basically are doing. And the terrible thing is the generations of children that come after that, they'll be destroyed. I mean, economically they're destroyed, and morally and ethically they're destroyed in the values. And not only that, the whole world will be destroyed because they're all going to look as America no longer as the moral guide, but as on the contrary, you guys are cheating and all that. Why can't I do that? She's the worst thing that can happen for America. It's astounding to watch how anybody could vote for this woman knowing that she is this and they don't care. It's just, you should know, all of these people, and I'll say it right, is that they will all osad litin adin. You know, you don't like Trump, fine. But look at the difference. You put her in, you are actually voting to put in a criminal, incompetent, corrupt. You know, what are you, out of your mind? How can you do this? You know, and if you don't vote for Trump, essentially you're voting for her. Well, I certainly don't believe that's going to happen. I think Trump will win, and I'm hoping that the scenario which I've just laid out in the whole shir will begin with that man. You know, and like if somebody's going to ask me why Trump, because like I said, I think it's possible he's a Gilgal of Antoninus, and I think the Rosh Hashanah says, hey, I like what you did for my people, Rebbe, Mishnayos. You saved my people. I'm going to allow you to bring the Gula. Interesting. And we see this concept of that there's always peace and tranquility before a messianic time. We see it 3 times, which I just showed you. That's why I illustrated that. And it probably even happened more, but you know, whatever, and so on, you know. So I'm certainly hopeful that this is the end. And I told you in Shurim before that Obama has designated the end of time. And therefore, why is that end of time 15 years from now? Because Klal Yisrael, now you understand, has to be rehabilitated.
What do you mean, designated?
I gave that shir in the bill a long time ago, in the 3rd or 4th year. You know?
Oh, the Iranian deal.
The Iranian deal, yeah. Because like I just read the Medrash.
Yeah.
That is the end of time. He gives Mangulaschem. That's Obama. But why, and I mentioned that why is there a 15-year delay? And now you know. Because the Mashiach has to go from Kilkuloi to Tikkunoi. Klal Yisrael has to go from Kilkuloi in a damaged state to Tikkunoi in a rectified state. And that's going to take time. So all I can say is, hold on to your seat, fasten your seatbelts. Because if he wins, your head is going to spin in terms of what's going to happen to Klal Yisrael. With this year, I've concluded current events. And if you want to, you know, review it or go the previous, I think hopefully I've provided a total scenario of the whole current events and the whole Messianic era, what's about to happen. Thank you.